Okay, I had a couple more thoughts I wanted to give you in regards to baking your cookies. Number one, I bake early or first thing in the morning, um, mainly because a lot of the times the kitchen gets so hot when you're baking because you're opening and closing the oven so many times, things like that. If you do it in the afternoon, you are going to melt. So if you can, try to get your baking done first thing. That gives your cookies plenty of time to cool down before you start putting icing on them, or any condensation or moisture that's on the top of the cookie is going to be gone by the time you're ready to start doing the icing. Number two, I bake higher. We talked about that in the last video. I bake at a higher temperature because that also it gives the cookie less time to spread. So we talked about this a couple of times, even when we cut the shapes. Remember, I put these straight from chilled in the fridge into the oven. So that way, if they were to be room temp, they're going to spread out and you're going to lose all that little indentation that we work so hard to get when we cut the shape. So remember, the higher temp is because I want the cookie to spread less, and it keeps it soft in the middle. If you barely touch this, you can't touch it, but if I touch it, it's got a little bit of a squish, not a ton like super squishy cookie dough, but just a little bit of a give. That gives me in that 24 to 48 hours to work on this cookie without it getting super dry and rock hard. That's the key to these cream cheese cream cheese sugar cookies, is to have that little bit of softness left by the time you're done. Even if they do get hard, they're still a great tasting cookie compared to most sugar cookies. But I would highly recommend, trying to get your decorating done on them within 48 hours of baking, which if you do the schedule that we talked about, you should be fine. Another thought is, when you're baking, as you go, your oven will get hotter. So what you'll want to think about is your baking time will lessen. So for example, I baked some of these first that you can see, and then what I baked next were, or towards the end, were these. And you can really see that these have a lot more brown around them. These I started baking for 6 to 7 minutes. The one that has the more brown was only 5 minutes. So a lot of times once you get the hang of your oven, you'll know, but you'll either, as you bake, start at, the higher temp for a longer period of time. And then as your oven gets hot and you're opening and shutting and it keeps adding the heat, towards the end, you may want to lower your temperature to like 375 or 400 rather than the 415, 420. And you're going to need to really pay attention to the time. So instead of baking for 6 to 7 minutes, the other ones you're going to bake closer to 5. If your cookie's not done, when you check it, let's say I look in the oven and it doesn't even have any brown on it, and it still kind of has this squishy, shiny look on the outside, only add a minute or two at a time. I wouldn't go more than 2 minutes, 30 seconds every time I check the oven. Don't think that I'll just check back in a second. Always set a timer. It will be the key to not wasting a bunch of cookie dough. My last thing I wanted to show you that helps with cookie waste and reshaping the cookies is, you can see like these are going to be wedding cake cookies, and there's a little bit of brown at the top. The bottom's not necessarily as even as it could be. If you do have spread on cookies, this is a great way to take off some of that spread. This is a microplane. This is your secret weapon. This is what's going to keep your cookies. Everyone's going to say, how do your cookies look so straight? And well, it's because I usually go back through, and if I have any imperfections or extra brown on the edges, this is how I take it off. So once your cookies are room temp, you can just grate that off, and you'll notice, as long as you really have don't squeeze your cookie a lot because you'll break it, but just keep a nice light touch. Sometimes I don't like a lot of corners. I do more rounded edges on my stuff. You can see that even taking that off just now helps. Let me see if I can get you a really good image. So even there, you have more of a straight line. And then too, you can see, let me see if I can show you. When you look at the cookie, it's not quite even and stuff. I take it and just even up my edges, especially if you've got squares, circles, really basic shapes. It's going to show if you have a lot of imperfections, or if your square really has a bunch of lumps or extra browning on the outside. So this is where I usually take it and microplane it. You can sit down and do this, and it'll take you maybe 15-20 minutes to look through your cookies and make sure that they're straight. but it takes just that little bit of brown off. And of course you're going to cover this up with icing, but something like this where it's popping off from behind, you know, I'll take it and just zip it right off. So now you no longer have that extra thing. This little brown is going to be covered with icing, but from the back, you don't want anything sticking up and out that has that extra brown, because your eye is automatically going to go to that. Okay, so I think that's it. We talked about microplaning. Oh, how to stack and store. So I usually have a very large container closer to my baking sheet size, but it's being used right now. So I store in regular Glad containers. This is if, you know, you've got all your cookies baked, they're room temp, you got to go run some errands, or you got to go pick up the kids. Put them in a container. I don't stack more than, I don't know, 4 or 5 high. If they're little, you know, you can stack several of them in a container, but if you start stacking a bunch and they still have some moisture in them, they're gonna stick. So you don't want that. So try to keep them lightweight. So maybe 4 or 5 high. Stack them in the container and close them. It's better to use more than you know, multiple containers than to try to stack them too close. The lid smushes them. You have extra breaks, things like that. Also, if you noticed, you know, on the base numbers, I usually, let's say, I needed 5 of these shapes. Normally I'll bake up to 6 just to have an extra backup, especially with cookies with writing. I always know that writing is something something I struggled with, so I will usually bake an extra 1 or 2 just in case I make some mistakes, or, you know, rub my hand through it, or there's always, you're gonna have a dead pile, you know, sometimes of ones that just didn't work out. So always add a couple extra in, and if you have any other questions, let me know. All right, thanks.